Sorry about that. Hello, hello. How are you? Sorry, I'm just trying to see past my iPad to actually see the toolbar on my monitor, just because I need it. Anyway, doesn't matter. Too much technology. That's what it is. So, where are we up to? We have had stories about people in North America dealing with George Washington and the local, I'm going to call them Indians. That's what they were referred to as at the time, I think. And our main character at the time had spent a lot of time with them and understood them, and then had made some money and was actually in conversation with a chap who was a real character, but not actually involved with what we hear of in the story, who had been involved with Napoleon Bonaparte in real life. And I'm just going to see if I can actually find what his name was, because I cannot remember it. Sorry about that. I'm not doing too well with names. Talleyrand, that's who he was. He was a real person in real history, in French history, and had basically been, I'm not quite sure what you call him, not really a diplomat, but someone who was involved with a lot of different things to do with negotiating between different parties, different people, different countries even. And one of those people that someone who is trying to get influence or is an influential leader of a country would want to keep close in some ways so they could just sound things out, and have him take the initiative on finding out things for them, influencing others, things like that. So he was a real person, and we had him brought into our story as one of the main characters in our last read that we had. This time, I think we're going to a different piece of English history. The reference for last time as to why it was in this book, which tends to be about English history, was because Talleyrand, representing the French, was wanting to get the Americans to side with them to fight against the English. And so he was trying to negotiate with George Washington. Well, not negotiate, actually. He was trying to, in the story, push George Washington into siding with the French to fight against the English. And at that point in the story, George Washington was like, nah, we're not doing that. Anyway, our main character for that section ended up profiting by the situation and going back to England. Sort of, yeah, kind of, after having had some things confiscated and all sorts of stuff like that. Whatever. So, this time we're going to have something completely different, because the next section is called The Conversion of St Wilfrid. Whatever. Some character who was historically part of English history who became a saint, I suppose. Oh, and by the way, these are little hair clips that are butterflies. Just felt like putting them in. Why not? I'm going to get slightly distracted by my other monitor because I'm using a different display on that one for some of my information. But that doesn't matter. You don't need to know about that. And I better say hello to all our new people. That's the piece of information I was trying to find when I was looking past my book and I couldn't see it. Anyway, so hi, I'm Jev. I read old-fashioned children's stories, and the sort of stories I read are the ones that I grew up reading, my parents read, and my grandparents read. I grew up reading their books when I was a kid. It gives you a really different outlook on life, what life is like now, because you learn to relate to how we live now as being part of the passing of time, the continuum that we are a point or a section of. We realize that we're not totally on our own. We're not actually just here isolated from everything else, even though sometimes it feels like that. That people have gone before us. They have been part of what became us. Their history became part of us. And it's one of the advantages of doing a lot of reading, especially of historic fiction, is it gives you a bigger understanding and a bigger worldview than just you and the world that you currently live in. And for the current climate of everything that's going on in our world, it's quite nice to actually have a little bit more going on. I'm just going to see if this is actually, yes it is, sorry. My new view doesn't show the captions on the screen. The old view does. I've got the two next to me. But I'm just looking at the new one, and I was wondering if the captions were still working, but they are. And apparently you can turn them off if you don't want to see them. So yeah, hi, I'm Jev. I live in New Zealand and I read old-fashioned children's books. And make sure you've got something to drink. I've got water because it's great for keeping you hydrated. Water, hydrated. Yeah, there you go. Have something to drink, something to eat, just as a snack, doesn't really matter what. As long as you're allowed it, that's cool. And preferably somewhere comfortable to sit while you're listening. And I'm all good with you lurking, with you listening. You can be busy doing something else, whether it's housework or study or working at work. And I've got friends, lots of different friends who actually do all of those things while I'm busy reading and chatting. I tend not to engage with my chat, the chat that's on my screen, unless it's before and after or in a chapter break or a section break, as the current book doesn't have well-defined chapters as such. Chapters for most of us are numbered. These ones have got a weird system where it's like a poem, a story, another poem, and then you get another section. It's like, which bit's the chapter? I don't know. Anyway, so that's when I chat, unless I ask for a little bit of assistance with finding out some information on something, how to say something or what something is. You are most welcome to look it up and type it in the chat. And if you're watching on YouTube, I'm sorry you're missing out on all this live fun. You might want to come and join us when we are live on Twitch. The link for that is on my YouTube channel. So there you go, have a look. And for those of you who are watching on Twitch and haven't a clue what I'm talking about, I save all my VODs, the recordings of what we've been doing here. I trim them a little bit, I take off the overlay so it's just the picture, and I put them over on YouTube as into playlists for each book. So if you want to catch up on something that you've missed out on before, like Millie Molly Mandy, Alice in Wonderland, The Wind in the Willows, lots of different ones, then go over to my YouTube channel, which is linked in my profile here, and have a listen. You're most welcome to converse with me over there. I do comment when people comment on the YouTube videos. I even had somebody commenting on that the other day, just how much they appreciated that I had responded to their comment. So there you go. Follow me in both those places. Following on YouTube is called subscribing, and then YouTube will let you know if you click the bell, which is like, let me know. And if you follow me on Twitch, both of those services will let you know when I am either live or putting something up for you to watch. And it means that YouTube itself will actually, if you watch something and you like it, YouTube actually says, oh, you like that, I'll show you some more of that. And it will actually make it a little bit easier for you to find the different stories that you want to listen to. And other things like that, even if it's not ones that I have actually done. So that's enough blether. We shall carry on with what we're here for, which is reading stories. Here we go. Rewards and Fairies by Rudyard Kipling. This is a sequel to Puck of Pook's Hill. The section we are currently reading is called The Conversion of St Wilfrid, and we will start with the poem called Eddi's Service. E-D-D-I, Eddi's Service. Eddi, priest of St Wilfrid in the chapel at Manhood End. That actually was a real place, Manhood End. It's thought to be a corruption of Manwood, the people's wood, and it's down on the south coast. It's a little particular corner of the south coast between Portsmouth and somewhere across to the east. I'm sorry, I'm not sure which it was. I did actually find it on the map, the area that's generally referred to as Manhood End. But I'm going to carry on with reading you the poem. Eddi, priest of St Wilfrid, in the chapel at Manhood End, ordered a midnight service for such as cared to attend. But the Saxons were keeping Christmas, and the night was stormy as well. Nobody came to the service, though Eddi rang the bell. Wicked weather for walking, said Eddi of Manhood End, but I must go on with the service for such as care to attend. The altar candles were lighted, an old marsh donkey came, bold as a guest invited, and stared at the guttering flame. The storm beat on at the windows, the water splashed on the floor, as usual, chapel roof leaking, and a wet, yoke-weary bullock pushed in through the open door. I'm guessing these animals came in out of the weather. How do I know what is greatest? How do I know what is best? That is my father's business, said Eddi, Wilfred's priest. But three are gathered together. Listen to me and attend. I bring good news, my brethren, said Eddi of Manhood End. So the three being him, the donkey, and the bullock. As he told the ox of a manger, and a stall in Bethlehem, and he spoke to the ass of a rider that rode to Jerusalem. They steamed and dripped in the chancel. They listened and never stirred, while as though they were bishops, Eddi preached them the word, till the gale blew off on the marshes, and the windows showed the day, and the ox and the ass together wheeled and clattered away. And when the Saxons mocked him, said Eddi of Manhood End, I dare not shut his chapel on such as care to attend. There you go. So he understood his job was to preach the word, and so he did it. Just because you have no humans arriving to listen doesn't mean you shouldn't do your job. There you go. Your job is not done for those who are watching. Your job is done because that is the thing that should be done. And so he did. Anyway, so here we get to the story section. The conversion, not the conversation, the conversion of St Wilfrid. I wonder if St Wilfrid's real. Shall we find out? Yes. That's the other thing you get, is these are not really like audiobooks where it's read perfectly with no mistakes and absolutely perfect accents. I've just been listening to a Hercule Poirot audiobook, which is full of short stories about Hercule Poirot, and they're read by the chap who was in the TV series, long-running TV series of it, and I can't remember his name at the moment, but he does all the voices in it, and he's wonderful. They're perfect. They have all these different accents. Sometimes it gets slightly odd with the American accents, but most of the time he's very good. And you have this little old lady grumping away about something, and you have to remind yourself that it's the same gentleman reading it, and he's amazing. But I don't do stories like that. I do the ones where I chat with you and I muck up the accents and I lose my place part way. It's much more like a bedtime story or just a general story reading. And I'm trying to find this bit here about St Wilfrid. That's what I wanted to find out about, wasn't it? I knew there was something I was telling you about or going to find out about. St Wilfrid. Who is St Wilfrid? Ooh, Wilfred from 634 to 709 is one of the greatest and also one of the most controversial of English saints. Born to a wealthy family in Northumberland, Wilfred was a second-generation Christian. That means his parents had become Christians and nobody before and the whole of their family were Christians. There you go. Oh my goodness. I didn't know he was controversial. Maybe I should look at that particular page and find out what they say about it, because that wasn't the page I was originally going to look at. I'll carry on in a minute. Come on, go to the page. Hurry up. Thank you. He had an interest in the things of God from a young age and went to study in Lindisfarne, a centre of Celtic Christianity under St Aidan. Lindisfarne is... You've seen pictures of Mont Saint-Michel and St. Michael's Mount. Mont Saint-Michel is in France, and it's an island surrounded by the tide. The tide goes out and you've got sand flats, but when the tide comes in, it comes in really, really fast. So you have to time it properly if you're walking across to the island. Now they have a causeway and you can drive and park and go and visit the cathedral and the abbey and all this sort of stuff. St. Michael's Mount was meant to be like a mirror reflection of it, but it's actually privately owned and all this other sort of stuff. It never got as big. Lindisfarne is a similar sort of a place where there was a monastery on an island and you can walk across when the tide is low to it. And it was used as a centre of training and teaching and so on. And they lived there as a monastery because it was a lot more isolated. And it was one of the things that the monks used to do is they would set up a monastery in a place where they could get on with what it was that they were there for without being quite so much involved with normal day-to-day business and towns and all these other sorts of things. They felt that they were called to be separate from the world, in the world but not of the world. And so therefore, to be separated from the world, if you could do it by physically having your location somewhere that was harder to get to, it made it, in their eyes, a lot more strongly compliant with this idea of being separated from the world. So I'm not going to keep reading this at the moment because it doesn't actually say, I can't see anything where it says why they thought he was controversial. I don't know. I'm going to open up Wikipedia and then I'm going to carry on reading because our story may tell us something. And it will be some of Kipling's story settings for real people were accurate and some of them were inaccurate. So one of our previous stories, the one with the young lady who had tuberculosis but didn't think it was particularly bad and didn't think it was tuberculosis. She just had been told that if she goes up to London, she'll get cured of whatever it was that caused her little cough. The Frenchman who supposedly was a prisoner of war on parole, so therefore he was out in the community, was a doctor and also observed a lot of nature, and he worked with another local herbalist, and the local doctor thought that they were kind of into some weird stuff. Now, the character of the Frenchman there, I think his name was Lanik, I'm not sure. That character is a real historic figure, and he is the guy who came up with a stethoscope, not the one where you put the bits in your ears and then it has a pipe that comes around and around bit on the end. That's a later development of it. But it was a hearing trumpet, small one, about this big, where you put one end up to your ear and then the other end on someone's chest, and you could hear the noises that were going on in their lungs and different parts of their lungs, depending on where you put the end of it. And he invented that. The character we had in the book was a real person, and he really did invent that. And that was part of our story, was he was using one of these, and that's why he was concerned about this young lady, because he could hear what was going on in her lungs and it didn't sound very good. So he was a real character in history, but he was never actually a prisoner of war in southern England. That part of it was a fabrication that Mr. Kipling put in to make our story interesting, to have it relevant for the children, Dan and Una, who are learning about little bits of English history. We are going to carry on with today's story. Yes, we are. Now, the Conversion of St Wilfrid. They had bought peppermints up at the village and were coming home past little St Barnabas Church when they saw Jimmy Kidbrooke, the carpenter's baby, kicking at the churchyard gate with a shaving in his mouth and the tears running down his cheeks. Una pulled out the shaving and put in a peppermint. Jimmy said he was looking for his granddaddy. He never seemed to take much notice of his father. So they went up between the old graves under the leaf-dropping limes. A lime tree is a different, not the fruit limes, it's a different type of lime tree, to the porch, where Jim trotted in, looking about the empty church, and screamed like a gate hinge. Young Sam Kidbrooke's voice came from the bell tower and made them jump. "Why, Jimmy," he called, "what are you doing here? Fetch him, father." Old Mr. Kidbrooke stumped downstairs, jerked Jimmy onto his shoulder, stared at the children beneath his brass spectacles, and stumped back again. They laughed. It was so exactly like Mr. Kidbrooke. "It's all right," Una called up the stairs. "We found him, Sam. Does his mother know?" "He's come off by himself. She'll be just about crazy," Sam answered. So Sam, I think, is the dad. And then old Mr. Kidbrooke is his dad. That's the grandfather. "Then I'll run down the street and tell her," Una darted off. "Thank you, Miss Una. Would you like to see how we're mending the bell beams, Master Dan?" Dan hopped up and saw young Sam lying on his stomach in a most delightful place among the beams and ropes, close to the 5 great bells. Old Mr. Kidbrooke, on the floor beneath, was planing a piece of wood. That implies that young Sam is lying on one of the beams above. Old Mr. Kidbrooke was on the floor beneath, planing a piece of wood, and Jimmy was eating the shavings as fast as they came away. Oh, sorry, Sam. That's the in-between one, the dad of the boy. And Jimmy was the little boy who's sitting on the floor next to old Mr. Kidbrooke. Why do I get so confused? Let's just read. Jimmy was eating the shavings as fast as they came away. He never looked at Jimmy. Jimmy never stopped eating, and the broad, gilt-bobbed pendulum of the church clock never stopped swinging across the whitewashed wall of the tower. Dan winked through the sawdust that fell on his upturned face. "Ring a bell," he called. "Mustn't do that, but I'll buzz one of 'em a bit for you," said Sam. He pounded on the sound bow of the biggest bell and waked a hollow, groaning boom that ran up and down the tower like creepy feelings down your back. Just when it almost began to hurt, it died away in a hurry of beautiful, sorrowful cries. Like a wine glass rubbed with a wet finger, the pendulum clanked, one loud clank to each silent swing. Dan heard Una return from Mrs. Kidbrooke's and ran down to fetch her. She was standing by the font, staring at someone who kneeled at the altar rail. "Is that the lady who practices the organ?" she whispered. "No, she's gone into the organ place. Besides, she wears black," said Dan. The figure rose and came down the nave. It was a white-haired man in a long white gown with a sort of scarf looped low on the neck, one end hanging over his shoulder. His long, loose sleeves were embroidered with gold, and a deep strip of gold embroidery waved and sparkled round the hem of his gown. "Go and meet him," said Puck's voice behind the font. "It's only Wilfred." So that we're meeting our new historic character for today's story. Sorry, itchy, scratching my ankle. "Go and meet him," said Puck. Puck's the one who introduces us to all these different characters. "Wilfred who?" said Dan. "You come along too." "Wilfred, Saint of Sussex and Archbishop of York." "I shall wait till he asks me." He waved them forward. Their feet squeaked on the old grave slabs in the centre aisle. The Archbishop raised one hand with a pink ring on it and said something in Latin. He's holding his hand up. He's probably got a ring on his finger like that. Just because that's how it was. He was very handsome, and his thin face looked almost as silvery as his thin circle of hair. "Are you alone?" he asked. "Puck's here, of course," said Una. "Do you know him?" "I know him better now than I used to." He beckoned over Dan's shoulder and spoke again in Latin. Puck pattered forward, holding himself as straight as an arrow. The Archbishop smiled. "Be welcome," said he. "Be very welcome." Sorry, just got to copy something and then we shall carry on. "Welcome to you, O Prince of the Church." Welcome to you also, O Prince of the Church," Puck replied. The Archbishop bowed his head and passed on till he glimmered like a white moth in the shadow by the font. "He does look awfully princely," said Una. "Isn't he coming back?" "Oh, yes, he's only looking over the church. He's very fond of churches," said Puck. "What's that?" The lady who practices the organ was speaking to the blower boy behind the organ screen. The blower boy, the organ was not electric. It had a blower. So some of them, a small one that you would have in a house these days, but it's an antique, is a treadle organ where you paddle your feet up and down like this, and it's got bellows under each thing, and it pushes air through the reeds that produce the sound. Now, a church organ would often have a giant bellows where somebody had to pump it up and down, and there were probably other versions of the same thing that were used as well to push air through the reeds that produce the sound in the organ, either reeds or pipes. So like a whistle where you blow into it and the air goes over a slot and it makes a sound, and the length of the tube decides what pitch, what height of sound it is, whether it's high or low, that sort of thing. So that's how they worked. There may have been ones that used like a treadmill or something like that to actually push the air through, but that's how they worked, is by pushing air through the pipes, or in a what did I call it? Harmonium? The little treadle organ that you have at home, or in a small church, a little chapel. Those are the ones that have a reed, a little bit like the reeds that are in a mouth organ, harmonica, mouth organ. Where you get this little wee piece of metal that vibrates as the air goes over it. Anyway, so she's talking to the blower boy. So the blower boy is the person who makes enough air through whatever mechanism it is for the organ to make a sound. The lady who practices the organ was speaking to the blower boy behind the organ screen. "We can't very well talk here," Puck whispered. "Let's go to the Panama corner." Okay, we'll find out what it is in a minute. He led them to the end of the south aisle, where there was a slab of iron which says in queer long-tailed letters, "Orate P," the letter P, "Anima Hiona Colin," Jhone, Colleen, Colin with an E on the end. The children always called it Panama Corner because the P and then Anima, Annema, looks a little bit like Panama, I suppose, and Puck's using their name for it. That's amusing. The Archbishop moved slowly about the little church, peering at the old memorial tablets and the new glass windows. The lady who practices the organ began to pull out stops and rustle hymn books behind the screen. You change the tone of one of those pipe organs by pulling out the different stoppers, and it changes which notes go together and the route that the air takes through the organ to change the tones of it, changes the type of sound it makes. "I hope she'll do all the soft lacy tunes like treacle on porridge," said Una. "I like the trumpety ones best," said Dan. "Oh, look at Wilfred, he's trying to shut the altar gates." "Tell him he mustn't," said Puck quite seriously. "He can't anyhow," Dan muttered, and tiptoed out of Panama Corner while the Archbishop patted and patted at the carved gates that always sprang open again beneath his hand. "There's no use, sir," Dan whispered. "Old Mr. Kidbrooke says altar gates are just the one pair of gates which no man can shut. He made 'em so himself." The Archbishop's blue eyes twinkled. Dan saw that he knew all about it. So the altar is up near the front of the church in a simple old-fashioned church, not a great big cathedral. It's up near the front, and it's kind of the centre of where the focus is in a church, in an old-fashioned church service. And in some of the churches, they used to have like a fence rail and then some gates in the fence rail to keep that separate from where people come and go in the main part of the church. And so what was his name? Mr. Kidbrooke had made a decision that they shouldn't ever be shut. And so he'd built them in such a way that they wouldn't shut, or wouldn't stay shut, so that people feel that they can connect with the altar. Maybe not actually go up there, but they're not shut off from it. Not shut off from access to God, I suppose. Anyway, the Archbishop's blue eyes twinkled. Dan saw that he knew all about it. That's about the doors, the gates not shutting. "I beg your pardon," Dan stammered, very angry with Puck, because Puck had sent him up there to tell him. "Yes, I know. He made them so himself." The Archbishop smiled and crossed to Panama Corner, where Una dragged up a certain padded armchair for him to sit on. The organ played softly. "What does that music say?" he asked. Una dropped into the chant without thinking. "O all ye works of the Lord, bless ye the Lord. Praise him and magnify him forever." We call it the Noah's Ark because it's all lists of things, beasts and birds and whales, you know. "Whales?" said the Archbishop quickly. "Yes, O ye whales and all that move in the waters," Una hummed. "Bless ye the Lord." It sounds like a wave turning over, doesn't it? "Holy Father," said Puck, with a demure face, "is a little seal also one who moves in the water, eh?" "Oh, yes, yes," he laughed. "A seal moves wonderfully in the waters. Do the seal come to my island still?" Puck shook his head. "All those little islands have been swept away." "Very possible. The tides ran fiercely down there. Do you know the land of the sea calf, maiden?" "No, but we've seen seals at Brighton." The Archbishop is thinking of a little farther down the coast. He means Seal's Eye, Selsey, down Chichester way, where he converted the South Saxons, Puck explained. Yes. "If the South Saxons did not convert me," said the Archbishop, smiling. "The first time I was wrecked was on that coast. As our ship took ground and we tried to push her off, an old fat fellow, I remember, reared breast high out of the water and scratched his head with his flipper as if he were saying, 'What does that respectable person with the pole think he is doing?' I was very wet and miserable, but I could not help laughing till the natives came down and attacked us." "What did you do?" Dan asked. "One couldn't very well go back to France, so one tried to make them go back to the shore. All the South Saxons are born wreckers, like my own Northumbrian folk. I was bringing over a few things for my old church at York, which is much further north in the country, not down on the south coast. And some of the natives laid hands on them, and I'm afraid I lost my temper, because they were taking his things that he was taking to his church. It is said," Puck's voice was wickedly meek, "that there was a great fight." Puck is a bit of a rascal, isn't he? "Ay, but I must have been a silly lad." Wilfred spoke with a sudden thick burr in his voice. He coughed and took up his silvery tones again. "There was no fight, really. My men thumped a few of them, but the tide rose half an hour before its time with a strong wind, and we backed off. What I wanted to say, though, was that the seas about us were full of sleek seals watching the scuffle. My good Eddi, my chaplain, insisted that they were demons. Yes. That was my first acquaintance with the South Saxons and their seals." "But not the only time you were wrecked, was it, Dan?" "Was it?" said Dan, because he said that was the first time I was wrecked. "Alas, no. On sea and land my life seems to have been one long shipwreck." He looked at the John Colin slab, as old Hobden sometimes looks into the fire. "Ah, well, John Colin, I'm going to call him from now on. It's easier to read. I'm not sure how it's meant to be said. I wonder if that's a real person." JHONECOLINE. Nope, can't find anyone so far. It's asking me if I mean John Collins, so we're going to call him John Colin. There you go. And ignore the rest. He looked at the John Collins slab as old Hobden sometimes looks into the fire. "Ah, well. But did you ever have any more adventures among the seals?" said Una, after a pause. "Oh, the seals. I beg your pardon. They are the important things. Yes. I went back to the South Saxons after 15 years. No, I did not come by water, but overland from my own Northumbria, because Northumbria is the area where Lindisfarne is that I was telling you about. To see what I could do. It's little one can do with that class of native except make them stop killing each other and themselves." "Why did they kill themselves?" Una asked, her chin in her hand. "Because they were heathen," he said. "When they grew tired of life, as if they were the only people, they would jump into the sea. They called it going to Wotan. It wasn't want of food always, by any means. A man would tell you that he felt grey in the heart, or a woman would say that she saw nothing but long days in front of her, and they'd saunter away to the mudflats, and that would be the end of them. Poor souls, unless one headed them off. One had to run quick, but one can't allow people to lay hands on themselves because they happen to feel grey. Yes, yes, extraordinary people, the South Saxons, disheartening sometimes. What does that say now? The organ had changed tune again. And obviously because of the era that the story is in, Una and Dan are very familiar with the different hymn tunes and the words of them. So that's why she's able to say which ones they are. Only a hymn for next Sunday, said Una. The church has one foundation. Go on, please, about running over the mud. I should like to have seen you. I dare say you would, and I really could run in those days. Ethelwalch, the king, gave me some 5 or 6 muddy parishes by the sea, and the first time my good Eddi and I rode there and we saw a man slouching along the slob among the seals at Manhood End. My good Eddi disliked seals, but he swallowed his objections and ran like a hare. Why? Said Dan. For the same reason that I did. We thought it was one of our people going to drown himself. As a matter of fact, Eddi and I were nearly drowned in the pools before we overtook him. To cut a long story short, we found ourselves very muddy, very breathless, being quietly made fun of in good Latin by a very well-spoken person. No, he'd no idea of going to Wotan. He was fishing on his own beaches, and he showed us the beacons and turf heaps that divided his lands from the church property. He took us to his own house, gave us a good dinner, some more than good wine, sent a guide with us into Chichester, and became one of my best and most refreshing friends. He was a Meon by descent, from the west edge of the kingdom, a scholar educated, curiously enough, at Lyon, my old school, had travelled the world over, even to Rome, and was a brilliant talker. We found we had scores of acquaintances in common. It seemed he was a small chief under King Ethelwalch, and I fancy the king was somewhat afraid of him. The South Saxons mistrust a man who talks too well. Ah, now, I've left out the very point of my story. He kept a great grey-muzzled old dog seal that he had brought up from a pup. He called it Pada, after one of my clergy. It was rather like fat, honest old Pada. The creature followed him everywhere and nearly knocked down my good Eddi when we first met him. Eddi loathed it. It used to sniff at his thin legs and cough at him. I can't say I ever took much notice of it. I was not fond of animals. Till one day Eddi came to me with a circumstantial account of some witchcraft that Meon worked. He would tell the seal to go down to the beach the last thing at night and bring him word of the weather. When it came back, Meon might say to his slaves, Pada thinks we shall have wind tomorrow. Haul up the boats. I spoke to Meon casually about the story, and he laughed. He told me he could judge by the look of the creature's coat and the way it sniffed what weather was brewing. Quite possible. One need not put down everything one does not understand to the work of bad spirits, or good ones for that matter. He nodded towards Puck, who nodded gaily in return. That's happily, brightly, cheerfully. Sorry, I'm just changing where the light is. I think. We'll see. That'll do. I don't think it's any different to what it was before, but we'll carry on. I'm just wondering if I can give you a little bit of a map. Maps. And that, let's find Portsmouth, because it's near there, and I'll show you roughly where it is. Just, it helps to picture what the story is. Ah, yes, there it is. Selsey, Seal Bay. There you go. Worthing, Goring by Sea, Littlehampton, Rustington, Bognor Regis, Pagham, Selsey. Selsey Bill is the point, the headland right at the very end of it. And Portsmouth is over to its west. and I'll see if I can give you a picture. So no, a bit less of that, thank you very much. It's a little bit too big. Copy and close and open up the image thing so I can paste it in, because otherwise I can't show it to you. Come on, come back. Thank you. Nearly there. Specific books, Rudyard Kipling, rewards and fairies, save. And then I can import it here under that one. Okay, not that one. Let's try that one. There you go, that one gives me a link for it. The other one didn't. Okay, so I'm just going to show you something first. This is where we had before with the children. I will resize it so you can see it a bit better. So when the children were, that's where Bateman's is, which is the basically where the children are based from, where they're living. And so in the story, Puck of Pook's Hill is just south of there. And then they had gone down and stayed on the south coast and in a cottage, sorry, trying to get my finger to move, right, that way. That's the South Downs. And between there and there was the coast that they went to that time. And that was where we found out about the people, the prehistoric people, going from using flint knives to using iron knives and things like that. So this is not in the same particular piece of coast. I'm just resizing this so I can do the other one. I shall now open up the other map, which I have just created for you. It's got a pointy out piece on the coast, a little bit like the other one, but it's actually further along to the west from where we actually had seen the story last time. I will move over for you. Right, here we go. So Portsmouth is here, and where the children were on the coast is further along that way, and where they were living is further up through the green over that way. This piece of land here, down here and up here, and then across here, because there's a harbour here, across here to this bit of inlet down here. That there is the piece that they call manhood, from manwood and some previous other version before that. And that area there, that there is Selsey, right at the end there, and Selsey Bill is the very tip of that piece of land there. And it's a particular landmark for those who are sailing near the Isle of Wight, which is down over this, down towards me, down here. The Isle of Wight is down here. Portsmouth, the Isle of Wight. Those little lines, dotty lines there on the blue, that's the ferries that go across to the Isle of Wight. And I think some of them also go across to France from there. Anyway, so that's roughly where this story is taking place, is on that piece of land there, which would have, it used to get, parts of it used to get flooded and all sorts of things like this. So that's where St Wilfrid is talking about his little islands, and Puck, or the children, no, Puck had said that they have washed away by now. That particular piece of land around the edges of it, parts of it where it wasn't as high, Selsey has Selsey Bill, which is this high piece of land, but some of the other lands alongside it in that area are a lot more low lying, and so therefore they get swamped and covered. They actually have areas around the edge of it now which are to control when they do get extra high tides and storms and flooding and things like this, so that it doesn't wreck all of the farmland that's in the area. But that's a newer development. So we shall carry on with what we're reading here. I I'm trying to think of why I was showing that to you. Anyway, so you could see where it is. It's down on the south coast of England. So quite possibly one need not put down everything one does not understand to the work of bad spirits, or to good ones, for that matter. He nodded at Puck, who nodded gaily in return. I say so, he went on, because to a certain extent I have been made a victim of that habit of mind, of thinking that something that's good is from a good spirit and something that's bad is from a bad spirit, rather than things just happening. I think that's what he's meaning. Some while after I was settled at Selsey, King Ethelwalch and Queen Ebba ordered their people to be baptized. I fear I am too old to believe that a whole nation can change its heart at the king's command, and I had a shrewd suspicion that their real motive was to get a good harvest by supposedly doing the right thing amongst the people of the church who would become the church. That would guarantee that's doing a good thing to have a good result, but doing the good thing in a superstitious way. If I do this, it will make that happen, rather than actually just looking after the land and the farms well. Anyway, their real motive was to get a good harvest. No rain had fallen for 2 or 3 years, but as soon as we had finished baptizing, it fell heavily, and they all said it was a miracle. And was it? Dan asked. Everything in life is a miracle, but, the Archbishop twisted the heavy ring on his finger, I should be slow, very slow should I be, to assume that a certain sort of miracle happens whenever lazy and improvident people, that means those who are not taking care of what they have properly, say they are going to turn over a new leaf if they are paid for it. Good point. My friend Meon had sent his slaves to the font, that's where the baptism was happening, at the font, but he had not come himself, so the next time I rode over to return a manuscript, I took the liberty of asking why. He was perfectly open about it. He looked on the king's action as a heathen attempt to curry favour with the Christians, the Christian God, through me, the Archbishop, and he would have none of it. My dear man, I said, admitting that this is the case, surely you, as an educated person, don't believe in Wotan and all the other hobgoblins any more than Padda here. The old seal was hunched up on his ox hide behind his master's chair. Even if I don't, he said, why should I insult the Let's try the words again. Even if I don't, he said, why should I insult the memory of my father's gods? I have sent you 103 of my rascals to christen. Isn't that enough? By no means, I answered. I want you. He wants us. What do you think of that, Padda? He pulled the seal's whiskers till it threw back its head and roared, and he pretended to interpret. No, Padda says he won't be baptized yet a while. He says you'll stay to dinner and come fishing with me tomorrow because you're overworked and need a rest. It sounds like the two of them are good friends, actually. I wish you'd keep yon brute in its proper place, I said, and Eddi, my chaplain, agreed. I do, said Meon. I keep him just next to my heart. He can't tell a lie, and he doesn't know how to love anyone except me. It'd be the same as if I were dying on a mudbank, wouldn't it, Padda? Oh, said Padda, and put up his head to be scratched. Then Meon began to tease Eddi. Padda says if Eddi saw his archbishop dying on a mud bank, Eddi would tuck up his gown and run. Padda knows Eddi can run too. Padda came into Wittering Church last Sunday, all wet, to hear the music, and Eddi ran out. My good Eddi rubbed his hands and his shins together and flushed. Padda is a child of the devil, who is the father of lies, he cried, and begged my pardon for having spoken. I forgave him. Yes, you are just about stupid enough for a musician, said Meon, but here he is. Sing a hymn to him and see if he can stand it. You'll find my small harp beside the fireplace. Excuse me. Eddi, who was really quite an excellent musician, played and sang for quite half an hour. Padda shuffled off his ox hide, hunched himself on his flippers before him, and listened with his head thrown back. Yes, a rather funny sight. Meon tried not to laugh and asked Eddi if he was satisfied. It takes some time to get an idea out of my good Eddi's head. He looked at me. Do you want to sprinkle him with holy water and see if he flies up the chimney? Why not baptize him? Said Mion. Supposedly, if you sprinkle the devil or a demon with holy water, it'll fly away, go up the chimney. That's, I think, what the reference is to there. Eddi was really shocked. I thought it was bad taste myself. That's not fair, said Mion. You call him a demon and a familiar spirit because he loves his master and likes music, and when I offer you a chance to prove it, you won't take it. Look here, I'll make a bargain. I'll be baptized if you're baptized Pada too. He's more of a man than most of my slaves. So basically he's a pet. He's like a favourite dog, a constant companion for Mion in the way that the story is being told. And yes, I can imagine that an animal like that, if it's raised by somebody and kept close all the time and cared for and fed and so on, yes, they could be quite loyal and attached to somebody, just the way dogs and even cats can be. Excuse me. Right, carrying on, after I've just copied this list. Right. He's more of a man than most of my slaves. One doesn't bargain or joke about these matters, I said. He was going altogether too far. Quite right, said Mion. I shouldn't like anyone to joke about Pada. Pada, go down to the beach and bring us tomorrow's weather. My good Eddi must have been a little overtired with his day's work. I am a servant of the church, he cried. My business is to save souls, not to enter into fellowships and understandings with accursed beasts. Have it your own narrow way, said Mion. Pada, you needn't go. The old fellow flounced back to his ox hide at once. Man could learn obedience at least from that creature, said Eddi, a little ashamed of himself. Christians should not curse. Don't begin to apologise just when I am beginning to like you, said Mion. We'll leave Pada behind tomorrow, out of respect to your feelings. Now, let's go to supper. We must be up early tomorrow for the whiting. The next was a beautiful, crisp autumn morning, a weather breeder, if I had taken the trouble to think. But it's refreshing to escape from kings and converts for half a day. We three went by ourselves in Mion's smallest boat, and we got on the whiting near an old wreck. Whiting is a type of fish. Fishermen refer to getting on the, and refer to the name of the fish when they're out there fishing and they get onto a school of fish that is biting, that's taking the hook or being caught in the net. When there's a whole lot of them there, they refer to getting onto them as an explanation of saying that they found a lot of them, they were able to catch them. So that he's just using normal fisherman's terms. We got on the whiting near an old wreck, a mile or so off the shore. Mion knew the marks to a yard, and the fish were keen. Yes, yes, a perfect morning's fishing. If a bishop can't be a fisherman, who can? He twiddled his ring again. We stayed there a little too long, and while we were getting up our stone, that's what they used as an anchor, down came the fog. After some discussion, we decided to row for the land. The ebb was just beginning to make round the point and sent us all ways at once like a coracle. A coracle is a very light, skin-covered frame that's used as a one-person boat, pushed very easily by the tides. So the ebb of the tide is when the tide is going one way, and along the south coast, the tide is very strong and it can move you from one place to another without you even realising if you can't see. And I'm thinking that's what's going to happen. Celcy Bill, said Puck under his breath. The tides run something furious there. I believe you, said the Archbishop. Mion and I have spent a good many evenings arguing as to where exactly we drifted. All I know is we found ourselves in a little rocky cove that had sprung up round us out of the fog, and a swell lifted the boat onto a ledge, and she broke up beneath our feet. We had just time to shuffle through the weed before the next wave. The sea was rising. It's rather a pity we didn't let Padda go down to the beach last night, said Meon. He might have warned us this was coming. Better fall into the hands of God than the hands of demons, said Eddi, and his teeth chattered as he prayed. A nor'west breeze had just got up, distinctly cool. Save what you can of the boat, said Meon. We may need it. And we had to drench ourselves again, fishing out stray planks. What for? Said Dan. For firewood. We did not know when we should get off. Eddi had flint and steel, and we found dry fuel in the old gulls' nests, and lit a fire. It smoked abominably, and we guarded it with boat planks upended between the rocks. One gets used to that sort of thing if one travels. Unluckily, I'm not as strong as I was. I fear I must have been a trouble to my friends. It was blowing a full gale before midnight. Eddi wrung out his cloak and tried to wrap me in it, but I ordered him, on his obedience, to keep it. However, he held me in his arms all the first night, and Meon begged his pardon for what he'd said the night before about Eddi running away if he found me on a sandbank. You remember? You are half right, and you are right in half your prophecy, said Eddi. I have tucked up my gown at any rate. The wind had blown it over his head. Now let us thank God for his mercies. Said Meon. If this gale lasts, we stand a very fair chance of dying of starvation. If it be God's will that we live, God will provide, said Eddi. At least help me to sing to him. The wind almost whipped the words out of his mouth, but he braced himself against a rock and sang psalms. I'm glad I never concealed my opinion from myself that Eddi was a better man than I, yet I have worked hard in my time, very hard. Yes, yes. So the morning and the evening were our second day on that islet. There was rainwater in the rock pools, and as a churchman I knew how to fast. But I admit we were hungry. So fasting is where you choose to go without food. Sometimes it's done on a regular basis. It's usually more than just a meal. Often it will be a certain number of hours or a certain number of days, maybe even a certain number of weeks. And as a monk, that's what the background of a bishop often was in those days, that was part of the normal living in a monastery and in church circles, was to fast, to go without food for a certain amount of time. And so because of being in practice with doing that sort of thing, having to go without food just because there was no food there was not quite as hard, because his body, his stomach, his head is already used to that way of doing things. So that's what the reference is to there. As a churchman, I knew how to fast, but I admit we were hungry. Meon fed our fire chip by chip, scrapings of wood, to eke it out, and they made me sit over it, the dear fellows, when I was too weak to object. Meon held me in his arms the second night, just like a child. My good Eddi was a little out of his senses and imagined himself teaching a York choir to sing. Even so, he was beautifully patient with them, even though they were imaginary. I heard Meon whisper, "If this keeps up, we shall go to our gods. I wonder what Wotan will say to me. He must know that I don't believe in him. On the other hand, I can't do what Ethelwalsh finds so easy, curry favour with your God at the last minute in the hope of being saved, as you call it. How do you advise, Bishop?" So he's saying this quietly so that Eddi doesn't hear. "My dear man," I said, if that is your honest belief, I take it upon myself to say you had far better not curry favour with any god. But if it's only your jutish pride, a man of jute, only your jutish pride that holds you back, lift me up, and I'll baptize you even now." "Lie still," said Meon. "I could judge better if I were in my own hall, but to desert one's father's gods, even if one doesn't quite believe in them, in the middle of a gale, isn't quite... What would you do yourself?" I was lying in his arms, keeping alive by the warmth of his big, steady heart. It did not seem to me the time or the place for subtle arguments, so I answered, "No, I certainly should not desert my God. I don't see even now what else I could have said." He was requiring honesty, so he was giving honesty. "Thank you. I'll remember that, if I live," said Meon. And I must have drifted back to my dreams about Northumbria and beautiful France, for it was broad daylight when I heard him calling on Wotan, and that high, shaking, heathen yell that I detest so. "Lie quiet. I'm giving Wotan his chance, he said. Our dear Eddi ambled up, still beating time to his imaginary choir. Yes, call on your gods, he cried, and see what gifts they will send you. They are gone on a journey, or they are hunting, said Eddi. I assure you the words were not out of his mouth when old Padda, shot from the top of a cold, wrinkled swell, drove himself over the weedy ledge and landed fair in our laps with a rock cod between his teeth. I could not help smiling at Eddi's face. A miracle, he cried, and knelt down to clean the cod. You've been a long time winding us, my son. Winding us, my son, seeking for the scent to follow, like a dog does. It's referred to as winding. It's catching the scent on the wind. You've been a long time winding us, my son, said Meon. Now fish for all our lives. We're starving, Padda. The old fellow flung himself quivering like a salmon backwards into the boil of the currents round the rocks, and Meon said, We're safe. I'll send him to fetch help when this wind drops. Eat and be thankful. I never tasted anything so good as those rock codlings we took from Padda's mouth and half roasted over the fire. Between his plunges, Padda would hunch up and purr over Meon, with the tears running down his face. I never knew before that seals could weep for joy, as I have wept. Surely, said Eddi with his mouth full, God has made the seal the loveliest of his creatures in the water. Look how Padda breasts the current. He stands up against it like a rock. Now watch the chain of bubbles where he dives, and now there is his wise head under that rock ledge. Oh, a blessing be on thee, my little brother Padda. You said he was a child of the devil, Meon laughed. There I sinned, poor Eddi answered. Call him here, and I will ask his pardon. God sent him out of the storm to humble me, a fool. I won't ask you to enter into fellowships and understandings with any accursed brute, said Meon, rather unkindly. Shall we say he was sent to our bishop as the ravens were sent to your prophet Elijah? Doubtless that is so, said Eddi. I will write it so if I live to get home. No, I said, let us three poor men kneel and thank God for his mercies. We kneeled, and old Padda shuffled up and thrust his head under Meon's elbows. I laid my hand upon it and blessed him. So did Eddi. And now, my son, I said to Meon, shall I baptize thee? Not yet, said he. Wait till we are well ashore and at home. No god in any heaven shall say that I came to him or left him because I was wet and cold. I will send Padda to my people for a boat. Is that witchcraft, Eddi? Why, no. Surely Padda will go and pull them to the beach by the skirts of their gowns as he pulled me in Wittering Church to ask me to sing. Only then I was afraid and did not understand, said Eddi. You are understanding now, said Meon, and at a wave of his arm off went Padda to the mainland, making a wake like a war boat till we lost him in the rain. Lost sight. Meon's people could not bring a boat across for some hours. Even so, it was ticklish work among the rocks in that tideway. But they hoisted me aboard, too stiff to move, and Padda swam behind us, barking and turning somersaults, all the way to Manhood End. Good old Padda, murmured Dan, when we were quite rested and reclothed, and his people had been summoned. Not an hour before, Meon offered himself to be baptized. Was Padda baptized too? Una asked. No, that was only Meon's joke. But he sat blinking on his ox hide in the middle of the hall when Eddi, who thought I wasn't looking, made a little cross of holy water on his wet muzzle. He kissed Eddi's hand. A week before, Eddi wouldn't have touched him. That was a miracle, if you like. But seriously, I was more glad than I can tell to get Meon. A rare and splendid soul that never looked back. Never looked back. The Archbishop half closed his eyes. But, sir, said Puck most respectfully, haven't you left out what Meon said afterwards? Before the bishop could speak, he turned to the children and went on. Meon called all his fishers and ploughmen and herdsmen into the hall, and he said, Listen, men, 2 days ago I asked our bishop whether it was fair for a man to desert his father's gods in a time of danger. Our bishop said it was not fair. You needn't shout like that, because you are all Christians now. My red warboat's crew will remember how near we all were to death when Pada fetched them over to the bishop's islet. It's a small island. You can tell your mates that even in that place at that time, hanging on the wet, weedy edge of death, our bishop, a Christian, counselled me, a heathen, to stand by my father's gods. I tell you now that a faith which takes care that every man shall keep faith, even though he may save his soul by breaking faith, is the faith for a man to believe in. So I believe in the Christian God, and in Wilfred, his archbishop, and in the church that Wilfred rules. You have been baptized once by the king's orders. I shall not have you baptized again. But if I find any more old women being sent to Wotan as a sacrifice, or any girls dancing on the sly before Balder, or any men talking about Thun or Loch to the rest, I will teach you with my own hands how to keep faith with the Christian God. In other words, now that you've made your decision, made your choice, now that you are supposedly following the Christian God, you can't go back and do the other things. So go out quietly. You'll find a couple of beefs on the beach. Then, of course, they shouted, "Hurrah!" which meant, "Thor help us." And, "I think you laughed, sir." "I think you remember it all too well," said the Archbishop, smiling. "It was a joyful day for me. I had learned a great deal on that rock where Pada found us. Yes, yes, one should deal kindly with all creatures of God, and gently with their masters, but one learns late." He rose, and his gold-embroidered sleeves rustled thickly. The organ clacked and took deep breaths. "Wait a minute," Dan whispered. "She's going to do the trumpety one. It takes all the wind you can pump. It's in Latin, sir." "There is no other tongue," the Archbishop answered. "It's not a real hymn," Una explained. "She does it as a treat after her exercises. She isn't a real organist, you know. She just comes down here sometimes from Albert Hall." "Oh my goodness, this means she's a performing organist, not just a standard one." "What a miracle of a voice," said the Archbishop. It rang out suddenly from a dark arch of lonely noises, every word spoken to the very end. "Desire des illa solvet saeclum in Flavia, teste David cum Sibylla." The Archbishop caught his breath and moved forward. The music carried on by itself for a while. "Now it's calling all the light out of the windows," Una whispered to Dan. "I think it's more like a horse neighing in battle," he whispered back. The voice cried, "Tuba murum sagen sonum, per sepulchra regionum." Deeper and deeper the organ dived down, but far below its deepest note they heard Puck's voice joining in the last line, "Cogit omnes ante thronum." As they looked in wonder, for it sounded like the dull jar of one of the very pillars shifting, the little fellow turned and went out through the south door. Now's the sorrowful part, but it's very beautiful. Una found herself speaking to the empty chair in front of her. "What are you doing that for?" Dan said behind her. "You spoke so politely, too." "I don't know. I thought," said Una. "Funny. 'Tisn't it? It's the part you like. 'Tisn't. It's the part you like best," Dan grunted. The music had turned soft, full of little sounds that chased each other on wings across the broad, gentle flood of the main tune, but the voice was 10 times lovelier than the music. Ricordare Jesu pai. Sorry, I do not speak Latin. I am totally butchering this, but I'm trying to give you a feel of it. Ricordare Jesu pai, quod sum causa tuae vae, ne mi perdas illa die. There was no more. They moved out into the centre aisle. "That you?" the lady called as she shut the lid. "I thought I heard you, and I played it on purpose." "Thank you awfully," said Dan. "We hoped you would, so we waited. Come on, Una, it's pretty nearly dinner time." And that's the end of the story part. So now we're going to have the poem to conclude the story. Song of the Red Warboat. Shove off from the wharf edge steady. Watch for a smooth. Give way. If she feels the lop already, she'll stand on her head in the bay, the lop being the oar. It's ebb, it's dusk, it's blowing, the shoals are a mile of white, but snatch her along, we're going to find our master tonight. For we hold that in all the disaster of shipwreck, storm or sword, a man must stand by his master when once he has pledged his word. Raging seas have we rode in, but we seldom saw them thus. Our master is angry with Odin. Odin is angry with us. Heavy odds have we taken, but never before such odds. The gods know they are forsaken. We must risk the wrath of the gods. Over the crest she flies from, into the hollow she drops, crouches and clears her eyes from the wind-torn breaker tops. Ere out of the shrieking shoulder of a hill-high surge she drives. Meet her, and hold her. Pull for your scoundrel lives. The thunders bellow and clamour the harm that they mean to do. There goes Thor's own hammer, that's a thunderclap, cracking the dark in two. Close, but the blow has missed her. Here comes the wind of the blow. Row, or the squall will twist her. Broadside onto it, row, or twist her broadside. Boat going broadside will roll over in that sort of weather. Hearken, Thor of the thunder, we are not here for a jest, for wager, warfare or plunder, or to put your power to test. This work is none of our wishing. We would stay at home if we might, but our master is wrecked out fishing. We go to find him tonight. For we hold that in all disaster, as the gods themselves have said, a man must stand by his master till one of the two is dead. That is our way of thinking, for now we can do as you will. Now you can do as you will, while we try to save her from sinking, and hold her head to it still. Bail her and keep her moving, or she'll break her back in the trough, her being the boat. Who said the weather's improving, or the swells were taking off? Sodden and chafed and aching, gone in the loins and knees. No matter, the day is breaking, and there's far less weight to the seas. Up mast and finish bailing, in oars and out with the mead. The rest will be 2 reefs sailing. That was a night indeed. A reef is where they make the sail smaller by rolling part of it around one of the timbers. But we hold that in all disaster, and faith we have found it true, if only you stand by your master, the gods will stand by you. It's talking about going out in a storm to go and save your master. There you go. I'm going to look up that hymn. I wonder if it's a real one. We'll find out. Well, I'm guessing it's a poem set to a tune. D-I-E-S. Desiree. Don't know if we've got... Yes, it is actually. It is. Here you go, Desiree. Desiree, the Day of Wrath, is a Latin sequence attributed to either Thomas of Celano of the Franciscans or Latino Malabranca Orsini, lector at the Dominican Studium at Santa Sabrina, the forerunner of the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas, the Angelicum, in Rome. The sequence dates from the 13th century at the latest, though it's possible that it's much older, with some sources ascribing its origin to St. Gregory the Great, Bernard of Clairvaux, or Bonaventure. It is a medieval Latin poem characterized by its accentual stress and rhymed lines. The meter is trochaic, whatever that means. Come on, your Wikipedia, you should give me a pop-up. In poetic meter, a trochee, chori, or chorius is a metrical foot consistent... No, too many words. Trochaic. The poem describes the Last Judgment, trumpet summoning souls before the throne of God, where the saved will be delivered and the unsaved cast into eternal flame, which is why it's big and grand and loud and powerful. And sounds great on a pipe organ with lots of bass to it, by the sound of it. It's best known from its use in the Roman Rite Requiem, which is the Mass for the Dead or the funeral Mass. And the Anglican Communion service books have an English version of the words to it. So there you go. It was a real thing. And the other one that Una recited was a known hymn at the time when the story was. So in this story, the organist was playing something that was written in the 12th century. Isn't that what they said? 13th century. But the character that we were finding out about, I think, was from even earlier in history than that. So it was a new piece of music to him. And Una thought that he would enjoy it, especially because he likes Latin. So there you go. And that's the end of today's reading, because it's after 4 o'clock. And they are ever so long in this book. The next section is called A Doctor of Medicine. And we will find out about that one when it happens. Who's the doctor? And what are they doctoring? What is the medicine about? There you go. And I'm guessing that Mr. Kipling is going to play a little loose with time periods and historical events so that the children understand a little bit more of English history. We shall see. Anyway, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to having you here next time. Bye.